In Module 1, we discussed objects and classes, and we touched on one way that object-oriented programming reuses code by having one class that can create different variations of the same kind of object. In this module, we'll expand that a little more by introducing you to subclasses. Alright, so you made yourself an orc, and you've been out in the realm, smiting dragons, finding relics, and doing whatever it is that orcs do. All the while, building your stash of golden tokens, the game's official currency. Maybe you're starting to feel like you've reached the limit of what your orc can do, and since you have enough cash in the bank, you want to upgrade. Sweet, check out that armor. And how about that club? That'll increase your damage attack. But Steve, you may be wondering, at least I hope you're wondering, how did we get from our plain old orc to this super boss orc? Did we have to throw out our old orc and start from scratch? New class and all? Remember how I said that two of the benefits of object-oriented programming are that classes are flexible and reusable? Well, here's another example. The way that we got from our original orc to this tricked-out new orc is by something called a subclass. A subclass is simply a way to add properties and attributes to an existing class. Remember, programmers never, ever, ever, ever want to do any more work than they have to. Ever. Subclasses make that happen by inheriting all of the properties and attributes from another class, which then becomes the base class to that subclass. Once a subclass has inherited from its base class, then it can do two things: either add or overwrite new properties and attributes. Adding is pretty straightforward, but let's make sure that you get overriding. Overriding is when you take something that already exists and change it out for a newer or different version. Say that you get a newer, better cell phone. You're effectively overriding your old phone with the new one. How about an example? Here's our orc class, and here's our upgrade orc class. See how short that upgrade class is? Well, since it gets all of the properties and attributes from the orc class, it doesn't need to be very long. All it needs is the specific things that it wants to add or override to an orc. A subclass isn't really a full class on its own. It needs to take data from another class first, before it can create an object. And like I said before, the class that provides that data is the base class. So in our example, the plain old orc is the base class to the orc upgrade subclass. Let's circle back to inheritance, because it's an important idea. You can't have a subclass without inheritance. What we mean by inheritance is that a base class's properties and attributes are passed down to the subclass, in a similar way that maybe your mother passed down her eye color to you, or maybe your grandfather passed down his hair. Just so that we're 100% clear, let's go inside the orc factory and see what this process looks like. Here's a fresh orc about to be made using the standard orc class, but he's not ready to be sent through the instantiator just yet. This orc is destined to be an upgraded orc. So, we'll add armor and override his club. With all of the parts pulled, now it's time to go through the instantiator. And now we have our new and improved orc. Now, there's something that I've been holding off on telling you until now. You know the 4 classes that we use to create a wizard, orc, elf, and knight? They're actually all subclasses of a base class called player. Player is a simple looking class, but what it lets us do is write one class that contains all of the properties and attributes that are common to our character classes. Every character is going to have a certain health level, and every character is going to have a bank account to store its golden tokens. By having a player base class, we can simply have each character class inherit all of that, so there's no need to write it all out for each character class. And if at some point we want to, say, increase the minimum health level of every new character, it only has to be changed one time in the player class, not in each individual character class. That's because the new health level will be inherited by all of the player class's subclasses. Here's the last thing to know about subclasses. A base class can have any number of subclasses, just like how the base class player has subclasses of wizard, orc, elf, and knight. But a subclass can only have one base class. And as we've seen, a subclass can become a base class with subclasses of its own. Player is the base class to orc subclass, but then orc is the base class to upgrade orc's subclass. That was a lot, I understand. So here are the takeaways on subclasses. Every subclass needs a base class that it inherits data from. A subclass can't exist without a base class. Any class can become a base class, even a subclass. A base class can have any number of subclasses, but a subclass can only have one base class. Let's test these ideas out with our interactive exercise.